Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the next generation of nuclear energy, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Casey Stone, and I am a lead engineer with Advanced Energy, where I do research and data analysis on a variety of energy-related topics. Approximately 6 months ago, I was asked to write a blog article on SMRs, which turned into a bit of a crash course on this topic. So I'm very happy to serve as the moderator of today's discussion and to learn more with you, the audience. This webinar is part of Advanced Energy's Exploring North Carolina's Clean Energy Transition webinar series. Today's webinar is the 24th webinar since we began this series in 2017, way before the pandemic, and it is the first webinar in 2025. So stay tuned for additional webinars for the rest of the year. Today is also the 24th anniversary of 9/11. So we'll give just a couple of seconds of silence for that. So before we go too far, I would like to give a brief introduction to Advanced Energy for those of you who are not familiar with the organization. We are a nonprofit energy consulting firm headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. We were founded back in 1980 by the North Carolina Utilities Commission. We work with electric utilities, government agencies, and a variety of public and private organizations in the residential, commercial and industrial, solar, motors and drives, and electric transportation markets. Our custom services include research, testing, training, consulting, and program design. Our members include Duke Energy, North Carolina's electric cooperatives, and Dominion Energy. So before we dive into the presentation, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today we are using Microsoft Teams webinar platform. You will notice that the chat box has been disabled. So please do use the Q&A feature, as this allows us to track and follow up with the questions much easier than the chat. So at any point, if you have a question or a comment, please submit it in the Q&A box. You can access this by clicking the Q&A button on your screen. Select Ask a Question to type your question, and then click Post. We will respond to as many of your questions as we can during the question and answer session at the end of the webinar, and we'll follow up after the webinar if there are any that we can't get to. So thank you to those who have already submitted questions during the registration process. This webinar is also being recorded and will be shared with everyone that registered. So if you need to log off or would like to reference it in the future, we will send it out, and it will be posted on the Exploring North Carolina's Clean Energy Transition website. You can also review any of our previous webinars back to 2017 on this site as well. And lastly, at the end of the webinar, there will be a participant satisfaction survey shared. So please take a couple of minutes to complete the survey to help us improve our webinars in the future. And we are going to start off with a safety moment. So wherever you are, make sure you are in a safe place to listen, view, and participate in the webinar. If you are driving, we prefer you find a safe place to pull over. Take a moment to be aware of your surroundings. Remove any tripping hazards. Be sure you know your exits and evacuation routes. And most importantly, take care of yourself and others. So as an introduction, the purpose of today's webinar is to outline the current landscape and state of the nuclear market in North Carolina and beyond. We want to understand the opportunities and challenges, including topics like increased demand and load balancing, economic development, site permitting and deployment timeline, and coal replacement. And we are also here to share current initiatives, pilots, plans, evaluations of the technology, and lessons learned for North Carolina, as well as to discuss what needs to happen for this technology to be viable. And I wanted to touch on a few definitions for any of you who have not already been immersed in today's topic. Today we'll mention traditional nuclear, which I think of as the existing fleet of nuclear power plants that were largely built in the 1970s and 80s. Now, a buzzword that I've heard recently is advanced nuclear, which some are calling the next generation of nuclear reactors being developed today. This includes the large light water reactors, SMRs, and microreactors. SMRs are small modular reactors, which range from 50 to 300 or 350 megawatts, and can be built off-site and shipped to a new plant for installation. There are also microreactors for specialized applications that are typically less than 50 megawatts. If any other terms come up during the webinar that are unfamiliar to you, feel free to ask about them in the Q&A feature. We are joined today by two speakers, besides me, your moderator. Our first speaker is Chris Nolan, PE, who has been with Duke Energy for 19 years. He became Vice President of New Nuclear Generation Strategy and Regulatory Engagement in 2022. In this role, he is responsible for planning for advanced nuclear generation development to support the company's transition to net zero carbon emissions. Chris has also served Duke Energy as a licensing manager in nuclear plant development and as Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, Policy, and Emergency Preparedness. Before joining Duke Energy in 2006, Chris got his bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a master's in engineering management from the University of Maryland. He worked at the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory in the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Plant Program for General Electric, and he was a senior design engineer at Calvert Cliffs Nuclear Power Plant. And then he worked at the U.S. NRC for 9 years in the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation, the Office of Nuclear Security and Incident Response, and Office of Enforcement. He was even chief of the New Reactors Environmental Projects Branch in the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation before joining Duke Energy. So we are very excited to have a speaker who is so well versed here today. Now, our second speaker is Dr. Vikram Rao, who is the executive director of the Research Triangle Energy Consortium, which is a nonprofit founded jointly by Duke University, North Carolina State University, RTI International, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Rao advises so many high-tech companies, including Alchemy Sciences, Innovium Technologies, Cella Mineral Storage, Lyra Medical Technologies, Cybele Microbiome, Fervo Energy, Lucera Energy, M2X Corp, Minerva Lithium, and Sage Geosystems, and the nonprofit RTI International. Previously, Dr. Rao got his bachelor's degree in engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology and his master's degree and a doctorate in materials science and engineering from Stanford University. He has been chairman of the North Carolina Mining and Energy Commission and senior vice president and chief technology officer of Halliburton Company. He holds 43 U.S. patents and has published more than 40 publications, including books such as Shale Gas, The Promise and the Peril, Sustainable Shale Oil and Gas, Analytical Chemistry, Geochemistry and Biochemistry Methods, Particulates Matter, and most recently, Carbon-Free Power, the Role of Small Modular Nuclear Reactors. So what a treat to have such a prolific writer and expert here today. So that's enough from me. Without further ado, I would like to turn over the presentation to our first speaker, Chris Nolan. Chris, take it away.
All right, sorry, I wasn't off mute. Thank you, Casey. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about the Duke nuclear fleet and our future plans within the Carolinas. If I start, I'll give an overview of Duke Energy as a company. We're the largest regulated utility in the country. We operate in 6 states, including Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. We're also the largest regulated nuclear fleet with all our nuclear assets in the Carolinas. We have ambitious carbon reduction goals to hit net zero by 2030, which we're well on our way to achieving with our additions of solar resources in the Carolinas, as well as transitioning from coal to gas and the strong performance of our nuclear fleet. We also have ambitions to hit net zero by 2050, which will require continued movement in that direction, but also the addition of new nuclear assets. We are above an all of the above energy company, and what we are looking to do is develop a system that provides the best value to our customers, whether it's relying on storage, nuclear, solar, wind, etc. As an enterprise, our nuclear fleet provides 83% of our carbon-free energy, which is a substantial statement when you consider Florida is the number 3 solar producing state and North Carolina is the number 4 solar producing state. When you look at our nuclear fleet overall, again, we have 11 units at 6 stations across the Carolinas, generating about 11 gigawatts of power. But when I talk about the fleet outside of the company, I usually use this slide where I talk about the 11 gigawatts of energy that's sufficient to power 8 million homes. We have a 95% fleet capacity factor in 2024, which is the 26th consecutive year we've been above 90% capacity factor for our entire fleet, which says we're reliable and we're reliable over a long-term period. We paid about $268 million in taxes in 2024, which says we're good for our communities. 47 million tons of CO2 avoided, which means we're good for the environment, and we have 4,300 employees that work and live in the communities that we serve. Our fleet's philosophy focuses on today, tomorrow, and the future. From a today perspective, safe, reliable, efficient operations, operational excellence, we have to perform today to ensure tomorrow. When we talk about tomorrow, we're looking at how do we extend the utility of our nuclear assets for our customers. So one way is through power uprates. So between now and 2031, we plan to add about 300 megawatts in additional generating capacity to our nuclear fleet through uprates at some of our units, and also transition more of our units to a 24-month fuel cycle, which reduces the number of outages, which increases the number of online days. And then the future is my role, which is how do we deploy new nuclear assets in our service territories to provide the best value for our customers. When I show the map of our service territory in the Carolinas, if you look at the blue square at the top center portion of the map, you'll see our Blues Creek Steam Station. That's a 2-unit, 2,200 megawatt coal facility operating on Blues Lake. And we have announced that as a future new nuclear site. It's a coal to nuclear conversion where we're reusing the water resource, the transportation, roads and railroad, the transmission resource, providing a future for our employees that are located in that area, as well as continuing our commitment to the community that has supported us since the middle 1970s when the plant went online. It's a coal to nuclear site. It takes advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act. We haven't made a commitment to build. We haven't picked a technology. What we're pursuing is an early site permit approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which would certify that site as both environmentally and nuclear safety-wise suitable for nuclear development for a plant parameter envelope of technologies. A lot of information in a short period of time. Basically, we're getting the site pre-approved for a future deployment when that decision-making point comes in the future. We plan to submit the application the end of this year. We expect the NRC review to take about 18 months. In the plant parameter envelope, we've included a number of technologies. The technologies come from a number of different groups. So Casey talked about small modular reactors. When you look at the light water version of the SMR, there's 4 technologies that are in our plant parameter envelope. There's smaller versions of the plants we operate today. So we have 50 years of operating experience. We have a known fuel cycle. They have passive safety features incorporated, and they've got innovations in terms of utilization of size and space to make them more economical. There's also Gen 4 reactors, non-light water reactors that use light water, that are non-light water. They use molten salt, high temperature gas, or liquid metal. And they operate at higher temperatures, which bring the advantage of higher efficiencies and the ability to use thermal storage. They also operate at lower pressures, which adds an added safety benefit, and they all have passive cooling. And then the large light water reactor, which is not part of our plant parameter envelope for ESP, but is relevant in the discussion since Vogtle 3 and 4 came online earlier this decade. Those are large light water reactors similar to the ones we operate, with the advanced nuclear features of passive safety designs. We have a license for 2 AP1000 units at our Lee Nuclear Station in Gaffney, South Carolina, that was granted by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 2016. We continue to maintain that license active, although we've not done anything in the area of construction going forward. That's an asset for our customers for some time in the future when conditions allow. Second mover strategy. So Duke is very focused on how do we do things that are both effective and efficient for our customers. And one of the ways we're doing it is to look at and evaluate first of a kind risk. And so we have a number of different activities. So TVA is the lead applicant for a grant from Department of Energy for the BWRX 300 technology at their Clinch River site. And we are a participant on that grant application. Our role is really focusing on advancing the detailed design to understand what the first of a kind risk is. This design is being deployed currently at the Darlington site in Canada by OPG. And we're watching both this grant activity and that deployment very closely for lessons learned to apply in the Carolinas. We're also a member of the GEH Technology Collaboration Agreement, where we're involved in looking at the detailed design as it develops and goes forward. We're also involved with TerraPower, which is a liquid sodium molten salt storage reactor. They received a grant from the Department of Energy, and we're a participant on that grant. We're helping them with our operational experiences, helping them with their operational programs, using our experiences operating our fleet to their benefit, and then taking that knowledge and bringing it back to the Carolinas. We're also working closely with Southern Company to look at the lessons learned that they achieved in their deployment of Vogtle 3 and 4, which 2 units that are operating very well right now. And a lot of people talked about how long it took to build and how much it cost, and that's not lost on us. So we're trying to learn as many of those lessons as we can, because they're really applicable to whatever technology is eventually selected. State and federal needs. So right now, there's a first of a kind technology piece, there's a first of a kind construction piece, but there's also a financing piece. And so how do you support deployment of new reactors in a service territory that's to the benefit of our customers? And so we've really defined about 6 policy needs that are really important enablers. Some of them we have, some of them we're working on. So long-term financing at a competitive rate. So these projects are typically about 10 years. They're multi-billion-dollar projects. And so financing becomes a significant portion of the cost of construction. And so the Department of Energy has a loan guarantee program, which ensures the access to long-term capital at very competitive rates. And so that program is in place and able to be utilized. Federal subsidies to lessen the cost of nuclear to our customers. So the Inflation Reduction Act has an investment tax credit that can range between 30 and 50% of the total cost of the project, depending on how many of the criteria you can meet. And that's a direct benefit to our customers. So as a regulated utility, tax is passed through to the customer. So any benefit we get from a tax credit is something that gets returned to the customer. And so what that does is the investment tax credit makes the electricity from nuclear look cheaper than other sources of electricity, which is an effective incentive going forward. And then you get to the discussion of early movers and first of a kind risk and climate change and national security and energy security, and whether that's a customer responsibility, a shareholder responsibility, or a taxpayer responsibility. And so we're working with other utilities as well as members on Capitol Hill on what is the appropriate grant or insurance program to address the first of a kind costs that will be incurred by early movers and how that can accelerate deployments of reactors. So that's a missing piece, but that's a piece that's being well talked about and explored. At the state level, and remember, we operate in 7 different states, and so the dynamic is different in each state. But the certificate of public convenience and need, how do we create a criteria that allows generation resources to be selected based on best value versus least cost? Traditionally, the criteria has always been least cost, and you see utilities operate in similar manners throughout the decades based on that criteria. Nuclear power plants offer some unique assets in terms of baseload, carbon-free, and also providing energy security. And so how does that benefit gets recognized? And so different states are approaching it in different ways. North Carolina passed legislation to look at overall system performance and system cost with respect to selection of generation assets, not just looking at the assets individually. Very effective forward-leading strategy. Indiana is another state that came up with 5 pillars that talks about energy security, environmental sustainability, reliability, affordability, and resilience. So that is another approach that's an effective way to balance different generation assets in making the selection. A reasonable expectation for cost recovery. One of the things that is unique about nuclear is that you spend about half the project cost before you get to the CPCN phase. So how do you get a prudency review that provides a reasonable expectation that if you invest that capital, that there'll be a recovery of it at the end? And then construction work in progress. So a significant portion of the cost of these projects is financing. And so construction work in progress allows us to recover the finance fees so that we're not financing the finance charges, which would drive the cost of the asset up for the customer. So a lot of work is going on in this area. That federal backstop for cost overrun is probably one of the more important elements that we don't currently have. And I'll continue on. And then the last thing I'll talk about is how do we communicate to the public? Nuclear power plants are great for building communities. I'm right now at our McGuire Nuclear Power Station in Huntersville, North Carolina. I live about 4 miles from here. The plant provides about $30 million in property tax, and that is a great community driver for this area. When you look at the cost of a coal or a gas plant, most of the costs are in the fuel, and that leaves the community. When you look at a nuclear power plant, most of their costs are in the facility and in the people, and that stays in the community. And so how do we show how the power plant fits into a community setting in a way where we can communicate complex concepts in a plain language format. So we've come up with a number of fact sheets. This is just an example as a way to interface with the community in a way that's both meaningful and informative. And so, Casey, I appreciate the opportunity. I'll be happy to answer questions during the Q&A phase, but this concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Chris. And with that, we will turn it over to Dr. Rao.
Okay. Sound good?
Sound great.
All right. So I'm going to speak only about SMRs, and start my stopwatch. And I'm going to limit myself to about 10 minutes, because let's have more time for Q&A. So SMRs, before we get into SMRs, let me talk about why we need them. Solar and wind today are the cheapest form of clean, carbon-free, let me call it, energy. I don't even use the word renewable anymore, because really what matters is carbon-free. And one of the issues so Chris raised the point about capacity factor, that they have 95% capacity factor. Capacity factor basically is the time spent being up and actually delivering electricity to the consumer. The capacity factor for wind and solar is very low. And part of the reason is that there are diurnal and seasonal gaps. And diurnal meaning during a day, seasonal is obvious. And so capacity factor for solar rarely exceeds 25%. So what does that mean? It means that for only about 25% of the time is actual electricity being delivered. For wind, it is highly variable, can be up to 40%, but can be much lower. And I'll show you some numbers. Geothermal energy and SMRs are, in my opinion, the best fillers for these gaps. And we will not discuss geothermal today, in large part because it's not the topic, but also, although geothermal, in my opinion, is more near term in terms of availability, it's geography limited. And again, we won't get into that, but I will tell you this, that it is not, in my opinion, not particularly suited to North Carolina. So here's the quick snapshot of solar and wind cost and how much it has plummeted in the last decade or so. And there are reasons for that, which we won't go into unless you have questions. But you can see that you're down around $50 megawatt hour, which translates to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is more the number that you would see on your bill. And so this is what I'm saying, that because the cost is coming down so much, and by the way, some of it is due to excellent policy in certain places. So Chris referred to certain state and national interventions to help, and policy would do that. But at any rate, this is what happened, and this is why it is so cheap. Now, this is a quick snapshot of wind variability. This is seasonal variability, and you can see. Look at that. The highest number is about 40%. These are monthly capacity factors, and you can see that the lowest is around 22%. So this is the kind of variability you gotta have to deal with, and deal with on sort of on a day basis rather than hourly. But it's hourly as well. And then finally, let me show you. Actually, I'll go to the. Let me see if I can go to the next. Help me here because the slides have disappeared at the bottom. Can you move them to the left? Let's see. Okay, I got it. All right. Here's a very interesting data point of seasonal variability. This is in South India, it doesn't matter where. And as you can see, the capacity factor has 25% and as low as 5%. And this is during the monsoon season, but really doesn't matter when or what. But this is the kind of stuff that we have to deal with. And then finally, if you look at this is a report that Rocky Mountain Institute put out, the gap fillers, I call them. If you look on the left side of the chart, then you see the number $50 per megawatt hour, that sort of number, till about 50, 60%. And then when you want to get the grid to be up to 95 or more than 80%, it starts costing you $200 a megawatt hour. This is for the PJM grid. It's a particular grid in upper east side, eastern part of the country. But they're all similar enough in the sense that the key point, the key takeaway here is that the gap fillers today cost a lot. So the gap fillers of tomorrow don't have to cost the same as solar and wind. They have to beat the cost of the current gap filler. So just a practical point I'm making. Okay. So let's talk about SMRs. So the nuclear energy has three concerns in the public. Safety, which is 3-mile island type stuff. Cost overruns, which are almost certain for big star nuclear. And then finally, disposal of spent fuel. SMRs overcome the first two. Chris mentioned passive safety. What he meant was that in the event of an upset condition, the plant basically shut down automatically without human intervention. This is the critical part. So that's what I meant by passive safety. And all the SMRs have passive safety in a slightly different way. Then cost overruns are less likely for SMRs, mostly because they are built modular. So when you have a big nuclear plant, you've got to build it for its amortized life, build it for 40 years out what the needs are going to be of the public. And therefore, of course, the capacity factor will be low in the early years. SMRs are built as you need them. They're fully modular. And the modules can be from 10 megawatt modules to 50 to 77, which is what particular company, or to 200 megawatt module. Regardless, the point is you can build to demand. Okay, because you can build to demand and you're small, your likelihood of overruns are less because the time frame is shorter, and because in principle anyway, the parts will be manufactured in factories, mass manufactured, and then assembled, and then shipped to the location. Most nuclear plants, much of the equipment is built on site. So for all these reasons, the likelihood of crossover is small. What SMRs don't handle is spent fuel disposal of spent fuel. In most normal reactors, like water reactors, etc., only about 10% of the active fuel gets used up. The remaining 90% containing actinides and so forth is not used and therefore has to be disposed of. Now, there are, just mentioned natrium. Natrium does use a very high proportion of its fuel. It's an advanced reactor. And so there are measures to address this. But in the end, they'll all face the same generic issue, which is the fuel has to be disposed of. Now, just mentioned that they have a plant coming up, replacing a coal plant. This is an important point. If coal plants are going to be replaced or shut down for whatever reason, whether because they've reached their amortized life or for clean energy reasons, the community suffers and jobs are lost. So if you can replace it on location with something else, that is to the benefit of the community. And part of the problem in doing that with solar and wind is footprint. The footprint of a coal plant is about the same as the footprint of a nuclear replacement, SMR replacement, sorry, and for that matter, a geothermal replacement. But solar will require at least 5 times the land area, and wind could require up to 35 times the wind area, the land area. So it is relatively impractical. And one quick statistic, a coal plant typically, a typical coal plant I picked, had 143 workers. Nuclear SMR replacing it will have about 270. They're different people, different training, but here's a really important point. For every job in a power plant, the support jobs are between 3.7 and 4.2 jobs in support. Those don't change, and those are important for the economy. So that's it. That's all I have to say, and I've reached my 10-minute limit, and happy to answer questions. Over to you.
Thank you so much, both of you. At this point, we would like to take a few minutes to answer some of the questions that have come in during the webinar, as well as those that were submitted during registration. And please understand that we may not have time today to answer all the questions, or we may not have an immediate answer to a question. In either case, we will do our best to follow up with you after doing some research or finding the best resource for you. So let's take a look at some of the questions that have come in. First one is probably a question primarily for Chris. How does load growth with data centers and electrification impact the urgency of deploying new nuclear?
So I would say we're in a moment with regards to load growth. We've gone for the past 10 to 15 years with 0% to 1% growth. I remember 15 years ago, we were anticipating electric vehicles to come in around 2015 and efficiencies from changes in lighting technology to come in around 2012 or 2013, and they would offset. So we were right on lighting, and we were off by a decade on electric vehicles. So we are projecting significant growth in the future, 3 to 5%, which is different significantly than 0 to 1%. And we're on all of the above energy companies. So we're spending a lot of money deploying solar. We're upgrading our transmission system to eliminate congestion areas. When we have excess solar in the middle of the day, we're moving it from the eastern part of the state out to the western part of our service territory. We have a pump storage facility called Bad Creek, and in the evening we bring it back. Looking at additional gas assets and whether or not that makes sense, looking at our coal fleet, those are all aspects. The power uprates for our nuclear facilities and life extension really addresses some of that load growth now, and new nuclear will certainly address it later. I don't think it changes the urgency. I think it just accentuates it, right? Nuclear is at the crossroads between energy security and national security. AI is both a demand and a solution to national security issues, and you're seeing a lot of focus on it. And so we're getting a lot of attention, and we're getting a lot of support at the state and federal level for our efforts. But these are long and complex projects, and so we're going to step forward in ways that make sense for both our customers and our shareholders.
So let me take this one as well very quickly. AI is going to create a need for more data centers, but generative AI is even worse, if you will, because the query on Google with regular AI is whatever energy it uses. The same query with Gen AI is 10 times the energy. So the energy requirement will increase. The key point on this, on how it affects us, is two things. One is there's a move to these companies having their own generation. So, for example, Microsoft is recommissioning 3 Mile Island. Somebody's doing it for them, but they're going to pay for it. The second thing is that Microsoft's posted number for that is 13 cents or 15 cents a kilowatt hour. That is heavy. Okay, I don't know, in North Carolina, industry probably pays 5, 6, 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So it may raise prices. So that's point one. Point two, all those are what we call behind the meter. So it's not, so I don't know who's going, so the Utilities Commission probably has no jurisdiction. Maybe new law has to be there. Point three, all those guys are relatively small. Considered small meaning, I suspect they can be supplied by 5 megs, 10 megs, 15 megs. That is the province of SMRs. Okay? So these are the points I want to make.
Well, that actually brings us to a similar question that has come in. Can you discuss the possibility of a third party owning and operating an SMR for hyperlocal power demands? And what are the oversight concerns that come with third parties owning and operating?
Casey, I can take that question, and we're seeing it right now in Texas. So Dow Chemical has a refinery plant where they have a combined heat and power need. The power to run the refinery and high temperature, high quality, reliable steam for the refining process. And they are another ARPDP applicant grant winner from the Department of Energy, and they're applying the X Energy XE100, which is a high temperature gas reactor for that purpose. And so here you have a industrial customer that is looking to use nuclear for their business to provide products that are made from clean energy. They're using an existing utility to contract as the operator for that facility. It will still be overseen by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, so there's really no change there. But the financing model is very different, right? You're not using a utility, you're using an industrial customer. And so that's what I see is new in the industry, which is you're seeing a different grouping of companies coming together to try to lift off nuclear and bring it forward, whether it's project developers or tech customers like Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon. Don't want to leave anyone out. Nucor is very active. Their headquarters is here in Charlotte, and they are very active at trying to find a way to create steel that was made from carbon-free energy. You know, the steelmaking process is very electric intensive. And so I see the moment is causing different partners to come together in different ways. So I don't think oversight from a safety perspective will be any different because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will be involved. But I see deregulated service territories and regulated service territories approaching the same problem in slightly different ways. But I think the same types of partners will be involved.
So one quick response, we already have them. We already have third parties. They're called universities, okay? And they already produce their own energy. In fact, Cornell has its own geothermal energy on location. So this is not, the concept is not new. With nuclear, it would be new. But as Chris points out, NRC is still going to regulate them. But I think we'll, as a state, we'll have to take a look to see what the Utilities Commission purview will be on this. Right now, they probably don't have any. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And for participants, I would just like to remind you that you can use the Q&A feature to put in any question you may have. Our next question is, can you comment on the cost expectations of adding SMRs versus adding additional reactors to existing nuclear facilities such as Sheeran Harris and Raleigh?
So I think we're looking, so when we selected the Blues Creek site, it was part of a siting study that looked at our entire service territory. So Sheeran Harris is an excellent site. It was originally designed for 4 units. We built one. It's got water, it's got space, it's got transmission, it's got all the things you're looking for. Blues Creek had those as well. I think there's some advantages in going to a greenfield site, and I would consider Blues Creek a greenfield site from the perspective of we're not building where the coal plant is, we're building adjacent to it. So, but we're still using some of the same assets that are already there. I think there's some advantages to that because there's not a complexity of the operations. I think there's some synergies at building at an existing nuclear a site like Sharon Harris because you already have a trained workforce, and adding additional assets to an existing unit has some synergies with regards to operations once it's online. And so I think there's a learning component in terms of deploying new nuclear. But I would say, you called out Sharon Harris specifically. It rated in the top 5 of the sites that we selected.
So I think the numbers that they're putting out are pretty good numbers. I mean, but we'll have to see about that in terms of cents per kilowatt hour. But the key to SMRs is that they don't have economies of scale. They're small. Okay, so the economies of scale are replaced by economies of mass production. So the parts are produced en masse. They are built in factories, assembled in factories, and shipped. So it should be cheaper. But here's the problem: chicken and egg. You cannot mass produce unless you have large orders. You can't have large orders unless something really works. Okay, and so this is where policy might come in. It would be federal policy at this point, whichever country it might be. Okay, and where to ease the likelihood of large numbers being produced. And in my opinion, it's about the only way that SMRs will become really competitive price-wise. But if that happens, let's hope that when that happens, then SMRs should be highly competitive. And I'm not going to put numbers out there, but I would say it's highly competitive with other, not other carbon-free sources. I think geothermal will be cheaper. But anyway, the key point I want to make is that policy support may be needed in order to get SMRs to where they need to be on cents per kilowatt hour.
Well, in that vein, what is the role of state and federal government to reduce the risk of these kind of deployments?
So Casey, I had a slide on that where I talked about the major elements of the loan guarantee program, which we have, the Inflation Reduction Act, which we have, and then how do we address first of a kind risk from a national perspective? So, the DOE Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project grants were really accelerators for the technologies, and they awarded some of those grants. But how do you accelerate deployments of sites? And really the thing that most utilities look at when they develop their risk matrix is what can we do to mitigate the potential of a cost overrun. And one of the things you can do is wait until you have a detailed design. One of the things you can do is follow a first mover. And so the BWRX 300 in Canada, the TerraPower in Kemmerer, Wyoming, the X Energy in Texas, those are all projects we're watching very closely. But if you want to advance in time, you need to create a federal backstop that provides protection on that overrun, because the technologies are new and being designed currently, and we haven't built these large complex projects in a long time, and so there's a learning effort there. The one advanced reactor design that isn't first of a kind is the AP1000. Vogtle 3 and 4 came online this decade, and they've been operating very well. And some people are starting to look at AP1000 in a new light, in part because the performance of those 2 units has been very strong. But still, the construction element of that is new. And so while the technology has been demonstrated to be reliable, that's an element. In the Carolinas, we are very forward-thinking, forward-leaning state legislators, and so we have an integrated resource plan that we plan to submit an update to October 1st, and to both North and South Carolina. But the legislation we have in the Carolinas is very enabling. Other states that have similar but different structures are Virginia and Indiana. Indiana has 2 pilot projects that allow an 80% development cost recovery, the last 20% in a rate case as part of a prudency review. Virginia allows cost recovery with a limit on the impact on rates, is that kind of provision. In North Carolina, we have the carbon plan legislation that is very effective in that it gives a system approach on how we achieve our reliability and carbon reduction goals, but it also has a 2-year snapshot with a check and adjust component too. And so I think at a state level, we're positioned well. I think at a federal level, there's a critical missing piece. And you mentioned the hyperscalers that are very interested in AI. They have the ability to create a public-private partnership in concert with the federal government at addressing this overrun risk, right? If they want to bring their load in fast and need to accelerate nuclear deployments, they could have a role with capital and aid of construction going forward. And so there's a lot of conversations on that, but in the end, you have to have a project, a technology, a site, and a timeline before those conversations get real. And right now, Duke is monitoring the development of these advanced projects.
So I'll split the question into two. One is de-risking, and the other is helping scale. On the de-risking, we're already doing stuff. I mean, just mentioned that Idaho National Labs is running Natrium there, doing a demonstration project for the Natrium, which is an advanced reactor, which I favor in many other ways, in part because of the way they handle storage. But so that's one. And the other would be an interesting possibility for the state, would be aside from guarantees, would be perhaps the military installations should. See, here's the thing. We have 3 huge military installations here in the state. If the military installations could check out the SMRs, especially if they all use the same one, okay, that would be better, all right? Then that would be really handy. And then that could de-risk it in a different way on federal money, on state aided or whatever. It's not my jurisdiction as to who pays for what. But that would be interesting. So on scale, maybe the military could be active by deploying it in bases, proving it in real life, and then obviously they're paying for it. So these are 2 thoughts.
Interesting. So can you discuss the benefits of nuclear energy beyond just being carbon free?
So I think I mentioned in my presentation a little bit about how nuclear power plants are community builders based on their economic structure. A lot of times we'll compare a gas plant to a nuclear plant. A nuclear plant has a 100-year lifetime. A gas plant has maybe a 30-year lifetime. And we compare them on the cost to deploy. And so that's not always a one-to-one comparison. The cost in a gas plant is in the fuel. Cost in a nuclear power plant is in the people in the structure. That stays in the community. 24/7 power, very robust with regards to severe weather events. You don't have to worry about a demand of gas in a regional cold spell affecting the pressure on the gas main, right? The nuclear plant has all the fuel that it needs for 2 years on site. So they're very robust. When Hurricane Florence came and tormented Wilmington and went from a wind event to a rain event, it was the Brunswick nuclear station that provided the electricity to power the recovery of Wilmington because it held up so well against the storm, where some of our coal assets suffered either from a wind or from a flooding dynamic. So they are very robust assets. They anchor the fleet in terms of energy security 24/7. But really, I think it's the model. If you look at the entrance to our plant here at McGuire, there's a private K through 12 school, right? And they bought land from us because they wanted to locate, near our facility, and we couldn't get any more positive feedback from the community about the role that we play.
So quickly, especially SMRs have features that are important beyond carbon free. One is its size, so they can be placed anywhere. And so they could be in communities that cannot easily be served. And a really important point on this is that it could largely, not, I wouldn't say eliminate, but reduce the requirement of transmission lines. And transmission lines are, aside from not being particularly pretty in a forest, they are responsible for a lot of forest fires. And that the reason for that is because transmission lines are bare, they're not insulated. And so when they get knocked over due to a storm, you get a fire. And so more and more of forest fires that we're seeing are transmission line based, and this has been shown in California for sure. So I think that it's the modularity, the ability to distribute, put it into communities that don't have it. In North Slope of Alaska, how are you going to get power to them? They can't do solar. You can't do solar in the high latitudes. So, but you can, but not very effective. So I think the size and the ability to place in different locations is one of the key factors beyond carbon free.
So can you discuss existing and future alternatives to storing nuclear waste?
Yeah. So I would say that that waste is more of a political than a technical issue, right? We have safely stored all the fuel that our plants have used on site, and we've been storing it for more than 50 years. I think it was interesting. We took a number of state legislators from across the country that were having a conference in Charlotte on our tour of our Katabi nuclear power plant, and we showed them our dry fuel storage facilities, and they went right up to it and they said, "Is this it?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Why? Well, why is there all the talk if this is all there is?" I said, it's a political issue. It's not a technical issue. And then someone said, "Well, what if you run out of canisters?" And I said, "We'll make new ones." We were making 4 right to the side at the time, and we could show them how they're made. And they said, "Well, what if you run out of concrete pads?" I said, "We'll just make a new pad." And they said, "What if you run out of space?" I said, "We'll move the fence." And so as long as the plant is operating, we can store the fuel on site safely without a significant incremental cost. I think we're relying on Department of Energy to come up with those solutions for long-term storage when we decommission our facility, so that we're not maintaining a security force just for used fuel. But with the production tax credit put in place for the operating fleet, you don't see plants retiring, and in fact, you see some retired plants coming back into operation, like Vic mentioned with 3 Mile Island Unit 1. And so, like I said, I've seen more movement from Department of Energy on trying to address this issue this year than I've seen in a long time. And so I'm cautious but hopeful.
So we have only 1 minute left, so I will make it a short answer. It is real. It is not political, but it is currently being managed very well. That's fine. But I think we have to do something about it. Today, nuclear is only about 20% of our capacity in this country. What happens when we get to 40, when we get to 50, which I'm hopeful we would. So that's point one. SMRs, the newer SMRs, Natrium, for example, uses up a lot more. That helps a lot. So instead of using only 10%, if you use up a lot more than that, that helps a lot because you don't even have to replace it as frequently. You can replace those every 10 years. That makes a big difference. So there are things we can do. I don't have much time because we have run out of time, but the things we can do to make it better. It is safe right now, but we can improve the situation for the future when nuclear is a bigger proportion of our total capacity.
Well, thank you both. Those are all the questions that we have time for at this time. If we didn't answer your question, we will follow up with you in the next few days. And at this time, you should see our participation satisfaction survey in the chat. Please take a few minutes to fill this out to help us improve and continue to offer valuable information and resources for the state. And before we end, I do want to take the time to just profusely thank our speakers. Chris, Vic, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today. It's really been an honor. And thank you all for joining this webinar. And we are so grateful that you chose to take time out of your day to participate. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Be blessed.
Casey,
and
thanks
thank
for the
you.
opportunity.
Yeah.